Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new NVIDIA daily update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over NVIDIA. Let's talk about what is happening to the stock, what we can expect moving forward, and all of that good stuff. So as usual, if you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice and I'm not a financial advisor. And of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on charts, updates, etc., well, I do share my thoughts with my members as the market is open, as the market is trading every single day. So definitely check that out. If you're interested, that link is down below for the YouTube membership. $3 a month is all it is for the first tier, which is the Tesla tier. $5 includes NVIDIA for obviously updates on Tesla and NVIDIA if you're interested for that. And then $7 a month, of course, includes non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA stocks and chart requests and chart, members. Members request tickers and I chart them over the weekend on Discord. Couldn't think of it there properly. Anyways, jumping into it, NVIDIA down, a smidge, 0.35%, we'll say, closing at $172.5-ish per share. Continuing to move up, but, starting to find some issues at this 1.272 Fibonacci extension at around 174. So this is a level I'll be watching for. Now, today was a very risky day. In fact, NVIDIA did arguably print an inside day. Actually, no, it kind of went above it. It's pretty close to an inside day, but it was very close to printing a bearish engulfing candle, right? This could have been below 172, a bearish engulfing candle, which would have been a major concern. Thankfully, for the bulls at least, it did not. The bears were definitely hoping for that. But the bulls ended up saving it and not actually printing a bearish engulfing candle. Now, you can make a slight argument this is a bearish piercing candle, I guess. There's arguments to be made because it did technically go higher and it did technically close back down at about the halfway point or lower relative to the previous candle body, which kind of looks like this. So, arguments can be made. This was a bearish piercing candle. It's not, it could be, let's watch. Either way, whether it's a bearish piercing candle, which is pretty strong, whether it's a bearish engulfing candle, whatever, they need follow through. What is the follow through, right? What even validates it and makes it something, worth monitoring and maybe hedging around or whatever the case may be, right? Well, that to me would be a red closure on Monday, right? So in other words, if NVIDIA closes, honestly, I would have to give it a bit more wiggle room because I'm not fully convinced by this, but essentially if NVIDIA closes below 171 to 170 on Monday, that to me, so essentially below these two candle wicks right here, that to me would be a bit of a red flag. And at the very least, we'll come back down, most likely pretty damn quickly to this 9 exponential moving average sitting at around the high 160s, like at least. Which, of course, will act as a support, right? This thing has been acting as a support for quite some time now, like literally weeks, if not months. But at the very least, that will require a retest of that, maybe even a continuation lower below it and finally lose that actual momentum, because this would be potentially something worth being, this would be worth a concern, like a legitimate concern, because it is a pretty powerful candlestick pattern. Again, I'm not fully convinced it's a bearish piercing candle. It's not the sexiest one I've ever seen in my life, to be completely honest with you. But again, just to make it safe, below 170/171, a little bit of a red flag, but below the 9 EMA would be an even bigger red flag. Now, let's say the bulls, they don't lose those levels. They don't lose 170, 171. They in fact hold it and they in fact push even higher. Well, above 174 essentially, which is the high of today and yesterday roughly. We open up 176 and change for that 1.414 fib extension. But ultimately, the next target, major target, would be closer to 179, 180 for that 1.618 Fibonacci extension. Excuse me, I'm going AFK and RuneScape. I can't log out of this world. Anyways, so yeah, that's what I'll be looking for, to the upside. This is assuming 170-ish holds, and we also recapture and get above 174. Going over to the 1 hour chart, right, we have 174. You can see we did go above 174 a few times. If I put 174 around here, where's 174? Right here. Right, you can see, right, we're not actually getting any 1 hour candles. We kind of went slightly above it, but we never actually getting solid closures. So the bulls would want to get a closure above this kind of range right here, about 174, like at least a 1 hour candle in my opinion, and that should unlock higher, maybe even closer to 179 at this rate. You never honestly know. The stock has just been completely unstoppable. But like I said, losing 170 to 171 roughly, give or take, would be a little bit of a red flag, at least down to the 20 or to the 9 EMA. Potentially, if we lose the 9 EMA, this could signal, much stronger weight or at the very least aggression from the bulls, and we could finally have, that downward weight, if you will, to finally close and lose that 9 exponential moving average. So let's watch for that moving forward into early next week, Monday and Tuesday. Naturally, I'll keep it My members updated on that, as it's happening. But, of course, I'll mention it in the video. It's going to be a little bit late, obviously, but it is what it is. Now, going over to the weekly time frame, there's a few things I actually do want to talk about here on the weekly time frame that also could be a little bit of a cause for concern, right? First and foremost is this. The last, few times in the most recent history of the stock, whenever it's had these sort of parabolic rallies like this, right? There's a few things in common that happened that made the stock feel very toppy. We're not there yet, actually, but we have one of two things, right? The first and foremost is going to be, you can see as we got towards the top, we have the SMI being in extremely overextended territory, right? As I pull it up, you can see which we're pretty much there right now. That's number one. And number two would be a lower high on the MACD histogram. We don't have the lower high on the histogram, but we very much have that SMI, which to me is now making the risk reward a little bit, less, I don't know, a little bit less good, I guess you can say, up here, right? You are definitely chasing a little bit up here, in my opinion. So let's watch for that, right? But that's kind of the first step, right? We do have the SMI in those elevated territories that when it's happened in the past has been at, or at the very least close to some level of a top, right? So let's continue and monitor that as it goes. But if we, let's say, starting next week, see a lower high on the MACD histogram, that's the same thing that happened, these times, right? So that was one example. Then we had another massive rally, SMI, back to that range. We got a lower high, got a small little push, but ultimately ended up selling off. And then, of course, it did happen similarly over here. Once again, got a SMI into elevated territories. And then, of course, we had that lower high. Whatever is it? So we had one lower high here that was a bit of a false flag. We've gone a little bit higher, but nonetheless, we printed a lower high just a week after that. And then, of course, we had that massive correction. Now, I'm not saying this correction will be this massive, but, it is something worth mentioning. And, if it is going to correct, if it is going to move back down, decently, let's say, the main level on the weekly suggests about 150 to high 140s would be the level to watch for. Again, massive area of resistance in the past should now be supports. And of course, we also have the exponential moving averages that will slowly make their way back up there to act as a support. And I would view a lot of support in that general vicinity around the high 140s, which from, around here would be a drop of only about 14%, which honestly for NVIDIA, especially after this kind of rally, not really too unheard of, right? Always remember, guys, whenever you have these big rallies, at some point the music stops playing and you do get a pretty sharp drop, right? You can see these sharp drops almost every single time. They happen pretty quickly. So just, be mindful of that as well, right? It is going to happen at some point. The stock won't just keep going like this forever. It's going to happen. You're going to get fresh buyers. That's just how things go. You have to go back to supply zones to get the fresh buyers back in, right? That's just how it goes. Eventually the buyers get exhausted and the sellers start overtaking the buyers. It's just a simple supply and demand type scenario. So make sure I don't log out. But let's watch for that and let's monitor it, right? There are some warning signs starting to flash, in my opinion. Not fully yet, but, we're kind of on our way there. Despite the bull still being in full control, we're starting to look for signs. Is that control starting to slip? Not really yet, but the hands are getting a little bit sweaty, right? So we'll continue monitoring it. But all in all, the levels to watch out for on the daily and the weekly. So let's continue monitoring and let's see if that anything comes to fruition off that. Very quickly, of course, options flow. A nice little call towards the end of the day here, combined with a put, 152.5 put, actually 100K, very high size relative to the options, average size there. But that's interesting. But the main thing I want to point out is this one, these two down here. We had a 1.3 million put on NVIDIA for next week, actually 172.5 put. So it's very in the money. Actually, it's slightly in the money, but that's there. And then we also had a 5.3 million put come in for NVIDIA 175. This one's a bit more in the money, of course, for August 8th. So those are the main ones that I saw that kind of stood out a little bit. Otherwise, you can see it's kind of neutral throughout the day, right? Nothing really highlighted, nothing really standing out until, of course, the close, which I just mentioned as well. But all in all, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow or Monday. Peace.